Hello again, everyone. I'm Eric Sperling. Thank you so much for joining us on episode 9 of All in Education's Sepas series. I'd like to welcome today's expert panel with us. We have Stephanie Parra. She is the Executive Director at All in Education. We have Ana Compian Loaiza. She is the Civic Engagement Organizer at Chispa, Arizona. And Laura Tellez. She is the Executive Director of Technology and Logistics at Phoenix Union High School District. All in Education is a local nonprofit organization that exists to build in Arizona where all communities have access to opportunity and justice. Now, their work is focused on strengthening the Latino community by closing the representation gap to build power, influence, and authority across Arizona boardrooms and classrooms. Now, through this monthly Sepas series, All in Education is working to bridge their advocacy efforts across multiple factors outside of the classroom that are impacting the educational outcomes of students. They're calling these factors the social determinants of education. Sepas will focus on having real, thought-provoking conversations like the one we're having today with leaders and community members and identify solutions to work towards creating meaningful changes in the systems meant to serve our communities. Now, today's conversation will discuss the topic of climate and the physical environment and explore how this can cause severe impacts on the well-being of children and those in the community. So rising temperatures, pollution, lack of access to water affect kids by increasing pulmonary issues like asthma attacks, allergies, increasing and creating food insecurity, causing mental health problems, developmental delays, and changes in their genetic makeup. So to give some context here on the long-term effects on how the environment impacts an individual's well-being, in Maricopa County, adults that live in South Phoenix have a life expectancy of 71 years of age, while individuals living in Scottsdale have a life expectancy of 85. So this 20-mile distance equals a difference of 14 years. So this has largely been associated with the environmental factors in the communities they live. So as always, before we get into today's panel, we do want to share a story to give some added context before we start the discussion. Here's Judith's story.
Some of my early memories of education started before I was even in school. My mom was a stay-at-home parent, and she really focused on just enhancing learning and developing us for me and my sister. I remember her really teaching us the alphabet and numbers and using things in the house to help us learn to count and to help us learn to create letters and write things. So by the time I started kindergarten, I already knew how to read, right? That was her thing. She wanted us to make sure that by the time we started school, we knew how to read. And so that was my first memory. My first memory was before I started school. So I grew up in Maryville, West Phoenix area, so not the safest communities or not the safest neighborhood. And I think my first experience there is just not really having a place for us to play. Not really having spaces in our own backyards, in our own neighborhoods to go out and do things with our friends. There was a park that was being built across my house, like a small neighborhood park. And I really remember me and my friends being super excited about just having a space to play, and there was gonna be a basketball court, and we were super excited we were gonna play basketball and do all these things. And so that was where I think I started to realize it. Unfortunately, it was very short-lived. By the time I was in junior high, that neighborhood park had been taken over by neighborhood gangs. And it was no longer a safe place for us to play. So now we had to go back to playing in the street or playing in our backyards. And I think that's when I started to realize how we really didn't have any other areas in our neighborhood. It makes me feel disappointed and sad for children. It wasn't until I was an adult that I started to really understand how being physically active, being outdoors, and safe outdoor spaces really impact a child's development. And I think now, knowing what I had to experience and what I experienced growing up, it just makes me sad that the adults that were in our communities didn't pay attention to that and didn't react to that in a way that created more areas for us that were safe. Being outdoors and having a green space or even having a time to play outside really is connected to the cognitive development of a child, the mental health of a child. It's a lot of research and data is now telling us that, but obviously we didn't name it that or label it that back then. But that really does help to center a child and focus a child for when they're in the classroom. So it definitely impacts their development and their school age years of how they react in a classroom and how they behave. Not having that release of energy in a sense, I guess. I think one of the things we get right is understanding that it's important to have, right? If we didn't know that, or if we didn't understand that to some capacity, there wouldn't be parks, there wouldn't be playgrounds in schools. But what we don't get, or what we don't focus too much on, is making sure that they are safe green spaces or safe neighborhood parks or safe playgrounds for children in all communities. We don't get that right. And we need to start focusing and turning that around so that those areas can be safe, right? Like for me, I think of, I just shared like how when I was in 4th grade or 3rd grade, it's been 20 plus years since I've been in school, and those neighborhoods haven't changed. And so it's our job, I think, as a community to really focus and ask and step up for those communities so that everybody has access to it. And talking and speaking up for those communities, I think, is the best thing, and asking our representatives to really focus on spaces that are safe, that are going to allow for healthy development for these children. I think that's the most important part. And just getting informed.
All right, again, special thank you. These stories are incredible. Thank you to Judith. So Stephanie, let's start with you. And when we're specifically referencing the physical environment and the climate, let's talk about how that ties in with the social determinants of education, why you guys chose that.
Yeah. So, you mentioned it. I think the stories have been incredibly impactful and really help us set up the conversation for today. So Judith mentioned it in her piece here. The climate does have an impact on a child's development, their mental health, their well-being, whether or not they have access to healthy and nutritious foods is part of climate and environmental issues, whether that could lead to, having food insecurity, and again, a child's physical health and physical development, which we highlighted very early on in the series, access to high quality food, access to health care, mental health. So those were all social factors that we've been talking about throughout this series, and the climate certainly impacts all of those things. I mean, the fact alone that the life expectancy is different for kids growing up in South Phoenix tells you a lot, right? And we actually our team recently spent some time with parents in a school in the Roosevelt District in South Phoenix, and you go to the campuses and just observing the neighborhood and the surrounding area, you see overexposure to waste, and the air quality is not as high. And so again, those air pollutants and the environment of where these neighborhood schools is impacting children that are going to these schools every single day, right? So that's the connection.
And you heard how important that was for Judith to be able to find opportunities to be outside and be in the environment. And so that's what we're talking about today, how that impacts, how the climate, all of that will impact a child's life. And so, Anna, I'd love to learn more about your organization, CHISPA, and how that plays into education in a student's life.
Yeah, thank you. Thank you for having CHISPA Arizona here today. So CHISPA is a nonprofit organization for environmental climate justice. We are uniting the community here to fight for clean air, clean water, clean lands. So that's what CHISPA is, at the forefront and center of activating our communities and going out there to, let our community members know to be involved. So CHISPA Arizona has been, since 2016, we have been fighting for electric school buses for the Phoenix Union School District and also Cartwright Union School District. We've gotten the first electric school buses for both of the districts, so we have been playing a big part. Our members have been activated, our CHISPA Arizona members have been activated since 2016 trying to bring these school buses to the districts. 40% of the smog that is in our air comes from buses. So if we can eliminate this much smog, then imagine how much cleaner our kids will be able to breathe. So that's how we tie it to the education system.
Awesome. Great to hear the stories about the electric school buses. So let's keep that conversation going on the school district. Laura, what are some of the challenges or barriers, some of the things that you've seen when it comes to climate and what you're doing at the school district?
Sure. Thank you for the opportunity, and thank you for having Phoenix Union here to provide some school voice. As Ms. Parra indicated, one of our challenges as a school district is related to getting and keeping kids in school. And so part of our challenge associated specifically with our topic today is when students have chronic illnesses or even short-term illnesses, that impacts their ability to be able to go to school on a regular basis. And if kids aren't in school, they don't have the ability to learn, and that retention rates go down and their ability to actually apply what it is that they're learning also decreases. So as a school district, we have a big interest in making sure that we're able to help children get to school on a regular basis.
And one of the things we've talked about so often, either on this stage, is that number we shared at the beginning of the show, that 14-year difference in life expectancy from South Phoenix to Scottsdale. That's just 20 miles. So Stephanie, I'd love for you to expand on that. Like, what is happening that is causing that much difference in life expectancy in this, basically we're in the same community, but just 14 or 20 miles away?
Yeah, I think in that, if we did an equity audit, let's call it, right? If you kind of audited what neighborhoods look like, the likelihood that neighborhoods in Scottsdale have more access to clean air, clean water, green spaces is probably a lot higher than the neighborhoods in South Phoenix. And so I think what we have to start doing to be smart and strategic as leaders in our community is auditing what are we offering? What are we offering kids and families in their neighborhoods? And why? And ask ourselves why the difference, right? Is it a cost issue? How do we get more resources to the community in South Phoenix? Is it a space issue? Well, how do we, what can we do? I think we just have to have smarter conversations, but I would start with an equity audit. And I think what we have seen in leadership at Phoenix Union is that we kind of do those audits on ourselves, right? Because our interest is keeping kids in school. And as Laura mentioned, it is when kids have chronic medical conditions and ultimately become chronically absent, it does not serve them in the best interest as far as attaining academically. And so we have to make sure that we are doing everything that we can to reduce the chronic absenteeism rates in our schools. And we have to look beyond, just the access to, the other social determinants, or even just access to transportation, which is another thing too, right? But how are we getting our kids, how are we creating spaces for our kids to be safe, healthy, and so that they can come and go to school as they need to?
So absenteeism is one impact here, and I'd love your perspective. And we got to hear from Judith at the beginning of the show, sharing her story. What are some of those other impacts you're seeing when students, children, don't have safe and healthy access to some of these, whether it's playgrounds or outdoor environments?
Yeah, actually I would love to share my story. I have a 13-year-old son, and he has asthma. He has chronic asthma. He's had asthma since he was a baby. And Alex misses about 30 days of school. Yeah, at times. So we have to have like a note from his doctor explaining why, because it's a lot of time. So when we live in the south side now. We live in one of the zip codes that live 12, 14 years less. I try my hardest as a single mom to keep us in better zip codes. It's crazy because I have to check the air quality index for Alex. I have to make sure that he's even able to go outside. Because otherwise he comes inside and the asthma acts up, and then he has to miss school the next day. So it definitely impacts where we live. It's a big deal where we live. It's a big deal if Alex goes outside. So his weight is up, his missing assignments at school is up. Social interaction is different for him because he misses so much school, all because of our air, all because of the quality of the air. In the south side, he's missed way more school than he did when we lived in Surprise. So just that in of itself is like a huge thing for us. It's like a life and death thing for my son. So it definitely impacts.
And again, it's one of those things where we can say it, we can look at a number, but to hear your story and hear what you're going through, why this conversation is so important. Laura, what are some of the adjustments or changes that are going on in school districts, maybe even over the years, that are starting to maybe alleviate or help in some of these areas?
Yeah, we've been very fortunate. Phoenix Union has a big focus on sustainability and what is it that we can do to contribute back to our communities in some way, just not short term, but long term. We've had a pretty interesting journey over the last several years. As was alluded to earlier, CHISPA was a big advocate for electric buses. In 2017, our community supported a bond that allowed us to have funding to begin to explore some different options. So some things that we've been able to do with the support of our community, take a look at how we can install desert landscape that works with water conservation, right? We know that that's a big issue on our campuses, and explore opportunities for alternative fuel vehicles. And so CHISPA was instrumental in bringing that to our attention and advocating for that. Our board, which Ms. Parra sits on, was amazing in giving us the support that we needed. We spent 2017 and 2018 really exploring how to make that happen, and we were the first school district in Arizona to be able to purchase and implement an electric bus. And to date, we have 4 electric buses in our fleet and 29 propane buses in our fleet. So we've made some pretty significant shifts. Just think you were really excited about that.
I'm excited.
And in addition, specifically in South Phoenix, we've been able to partner with Roosevelt Elementary District to be able to install on their property an electric charging station that we will ultimately share between our vehicles. And it is our goal as a district to have electric vehicles in service in all areas of the district as we continue to move forward. So we're really excited about that initiative.
So Stephanie, with that being said, what are school districts doing collaboratively and interacting? Like, you know, we talked about what's happening with life expectancy from one area to another, but how are districts themselves working together to help alleviate some of these concerns?
Yeah, I think Laura just hit on a perfect example of 2 districts coming together and aligning around the value of you know, improving the air quality that our kids have access to through the purchase of electric school buses. And so I think that school districts can do certainly a lot more to do that. I'm glad to hear y'all are talking to Cartwright. Right, I would say all of the 14 school districts in the Phoenix Urban Core should really kind of come together because I think we have an opportunity to share resources and support one another. Again, when we all obviously care about our kids, we all want our kids to be successful, and when we align on those shared goals and values, we can make our resources go further.
And being able to repeat positives, just like you said, like listening to you, like that is a repeatable positive. That is something we can act on. And I want to ask you about, because we've been talking in this episode about Maricopa County. What about other areas, rural areas of Arizona? Are they experiencing some of the same things when it comes to climate change?
What comes up to mind is actually Yuma County.
Okay.
It's one of the hottest in Arizona. You guys think Phoenix is hot? I think Yuma is way hotter.
Back to differ. I know.
But we have farm workers that, regardless of the temperatures outside, they have to go out there. So we have to watch out for the farm workers. And then additionally, indigenous communities are going through a drought as well, you know, so we have to keep them in mind. So it definitely affects every part of Arizona.
I grew up in Yuma, so I know it's hot.
Laura, I want to ask you this question because Stephanie and I were just talking about this actually before the show. Like, it is one thing for us or leaders to come forward and say, oh, we need to be doing this or we need to be doing that. How do you get the students involved? How do you start rallying that population behind some of this?
I will say I think today's youth is very service and community focused. And so there's definitely an interest for our students. It's what vehicles are we going to use to provide them that opportunity to use their voices. I am proud to say that all of our campuses have sustainability clubs of some kind. They go by different names. Some are Blue Planet Society, some are recycling clubs, some use their school mascot names. But the focus is really on sustainability initiatives. And so they might manage a recycling program, or they might look for ways to reduce waste. We were also very fortunate that our board supported an initiative called participatory budgeting, in which we set aside capital funds for students to vote on different projects of choice Some things that came out of that process were shade structures being erected on our campuses so students could be outside and enjoy the outside air, even if it's a little warmer in terms of temperatures, but also water bottle filling stations so that they're able to bring a refillable container of some kind and we don't see as much waste as far as plastic is concerned on the campus. So those are some examples of ways that students have been able to get involved.
Stephanie, this has been one of my favorite shows for repeatable positives. Like you just, oh yeah, yes, yes. So transitioning now with that call to action.
Yeah.
What is the call to action for community leaders out there? What are those actionable items that they can take away from this episode?
Yeah, I would say a couple things. One, like we all can look and do an equity audit on ourselves, whether you're leading a school or you're leading a city. You can audit how you are investing resources and how you can take some of these best practices, kind of that second point to your point around there are repeatable positives here. What's working and how can we replicate at scale? How can school systems learn from each other about best practices on this issue? How can city leaders look to cities that are doing this work well and replicate and invest their resources into sustainable efforts?
On the same question, like call to action here. What's you were so vulnerable with us, sharing some of your stories.
Yeah.
What's your call to action?
Call to action. Chispa Arizona has a youth group. It's called Plantando Semillas, sowing seeds. This is Votando y Plantando. We go out into the community and to the schools. I've been going to the schools and recruiting kids, making them part of Chispa Arizona, and teaching them about community service, teaching them about how to make our planet greener, about kids sometimes wonder, like, we talk about saving the planet so much, and like Chispa Arizona is a perfect place to do this. Like we are trying to save the planet. So we go out there and teach the kids about sustainability and about the heat island effect, right? And about teaching their parents to go out and vote and doing everything that has to do with civic engagement. These kids come here and they're involved in hikes and gardening and learning all about composting and doing everything that we can to ensure that these kids grow up with environmental justice in their minds and can take this home and teach their parents all about it. Because I think in the west side and the south side, a lot of our parents didn't get to teach us this stuff. So if we take it upon ourselves and teach the kids this, they're going to go home and talk about it.
What's the response like from kids? Because we were just talking about that, like rallying kids. When you said that we're recruiting kids, like I didn't know what sustainability meant till I was 30. I didn't understand. What's the response like when you're recruiting kids?
I started with Chispa in like 2017, and it was a bit harder then to kind of push saving Mother Earth to a person. And now I think you're right. People are more open-minded to like the whole, let's activate and do something about this. And the kids are like at the forefront. Kids are so open to trying to make a difference. So when I go out there and talk about that, they get so excited. At ASU Prep, I've been to a couple different schools, and I remember at ASU Prep, it was like such a big deal. They wanted to form a garden, and they want to be part of the group, and they want to, activate in some way. So Chispa Arizona is a place to come and activate, like to come and be part of something bigger.
That's awesome. Okay, same question. Call to action here. We've been talking about the positives, getting people excited. What's your call to action?
So I would piggyback on a couple of ideas that have been presented already. I think because of our current global situation and having lived through a pandemic, I think people are a little bit more health-minded now and a little bit more willing to take action. Unfortunately, maybe that's a positive that came out of it. But to the points around activating and organizing and advocating, I would really encourage our parents to feel welcome on our campuses to express what it is that they need from our schools, particularly around these issues. You have a voice through your vote, and it's super important that you get engaged. As I mentioned earlier, our community has been very supportive of our bonds and overrides, and those are funding sources desperately needed by schools to be able to make some of these things that we're talking about realities. So our students are fabulous. They're willing to advocate. Our school leaders are willing to listen, and we have great opportunities to get engaged and use voices in those areas too.
Stephanie, I want to get you just one last kind of final thought, final wrap up here, because it is amazing to go through that. We've been through 9 episodes now, and how all of this does tie together. But this episode specifically, like, after hearing some incredible testimonials here and thoughts and perspectives, what are your thoughts on moving this discussion further?
I think it's important for us to kind of bring back, and the whole purpose of this series was to highlight the fact that there are social factors impacting educational attainment. And this is one of those issues where several of the social determinants that we have highlighted are really under a magnifying glass and a spotlight here, right? And so, like, how are we going to come together around really building solutions that don't just solve for one issue, but that are really looking at the social determinants of education as a whole, so that we can start actually moving our community forward and truly providing opportunity and justice for every single child across the state of Arizona.
Well, we hope you all enjoyed this eye-opening discussion. It's been so critical, informing us on how the climate and the physical environment is such a complex issue. It's not a one sort of solution fixes all. We do want to thank everyone for joining us on this episode of All in Education's Sepas series, The Social Determinants of Education. As a reminder, we will continue building on the conversation every month, bringing you a deep dive conversation on each of these topics. So, Stephanie, Anna, Laura, thank you so much. And I know, Stephanie, you want to send a big shout out to the Garcia family, right?
Absolutely. We are super grateful. We can't put this series on without our supporters, so we are grateful to the Garcia Family Foundation for providing the resources to run Sepas.
Thank you so much, and make sure you tune in next month as we discuss how the economy and access to jobs has continuously impacted families and students. Thank you so much. We'll see you next time.